Hello, I'm Kads and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be covering my approach to the current iteration of the event dungeon. Obviously, there's probably been plenty of guides over the past couple of months, but since I was gone for a month, I figured I'd throw my hat into the ring and mostly just showcase the teams that I've been using to farm stage 20 and stage 25. I basically stopped there. I didn't really feel the need based off what I've been seeing in the zeitgeist that it was worth going out to stage 30. But of course, we're also going to break down the boss, go through his abilities, talk about his passives, and some potential weaknesses that can help you generate or craft a team around him, just in case you haven't made a team thus far to farm the event dungeon. So of course, this iteration of the event dungeon is part of the collaboration between Raid and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and thus the boss is Shredder himself, one of the villains from that universe. So going through is his abilities. I guess we'll mention he is a Void legendary champion. He's also existing in the game, of course, and all of his damage is based on HP. So you should know that him being an enemy combatant means that he's going to hit relatively hard because bosses have a ridiculous amount of HP. We're going to go down the line through his skills, but he is going to go in the exact reverse order of this in terms of the A1, A2, A3. So the A1 here, triple hitter, the second and third hits will ignore 5% more defense or 5% and then 10% of defense respectively, and the second and third hits will deal more damage. So he just ignores more defense the more he hits you, and he deals more damage the more he hits you. This is not really the ability you have to worry about. The A2 is a little bit more annoying. It's a double hitter AoE, and each critical hit will destroy the enemy's defense by 5%, so he'll deal more damage to you based on lowering your defense. And then each critical hit will also increase his max HP by 5%, stacking up to 30 for each of these, meaning that he will deal more damage to you because he has higher max HP. He also has a decent chance to place a leech, so he can heal himself a little bit, but of course, your health pool relative to his is so negligible, so you don't have to worry about him healing from the leech, and that's somehow affecting the run, and that debuff can't be resisted if he's under a veil or perfect veil, which we'll come back to a bit later, or I guess we'll jump to with the A3 as well as the passive. But the A3 here, another AoE attack. Before attacking, he will steal all buffs from a single target. He typically targets the person with the most buffs, not really anything besides that. So if you have a high resistance tank, kind of like the Head of Mischief type deal, that can be good to resist that. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter if he steals your buffs, depending upon your team composition, of course. And this effect cannot be resisted, of course, once again, if he's under a veil or perfect veil. He will also fill his turn meter for each buff stolen. So depending upon who has that many buffs or how many buffs you have on your team, he could get a lot of turn meter, which could allow him to either take a back-to-back turn from the A3 into the A2, which could do a lot of damage to you in a short amount of time, or he might not get any turn meter because, you know, he didn't end up stealing any buffs. Depends on your team composition once again. The A3 can be pretty painful in and of itself because it does inherently ignore 50% of the enemy's defense, as well as ignore shield and block damage, so you can't use block damage to prevent this from doing stuff, but notably you could use some sort of unkillable if you wanted to go that route. And then if he's under a veil or perfect veil, it will ignore 30% damage of the enemy's defense instead of the 15% that is innate. So essentially, in terms of his kit, all he really does is deal damage. He can deal a bit more damage depending upon, you know, landing crits and stuff like that, but he's not really that scary in terms of utility like an Odin or a Queen of Hearts. So we've had some scarier bosses, but he nonetheless does hit relatively hard because he has a massive amount of HP. When it comes to the passives, these are the ones you want to consider the most, particularly the active effect, which we'll get to. But the passive effect, you just want to think about it. He does decrease all incoming damage by 30%. This is kind of like Farrakhan's the Fat's passive, where he just spreads it around to all the allies. So you try to deal damage to him, and the minions will take some of that damage on his behalf. And then he will also deal more damage, 15% for each of his dead allies. So whenever you kill the minions, which typically you want to do, he will then deal a lot more damage to you and your team because his allies are dead. But the active effect is the one that you want to pay the most attention to, and that's the one that can be quite annoying to deal with, at least in the traditional form of how we deal with the boss. There are ways to get around this, as we'll see throughout the teams. But whenever this champion loses 20% of their max HP in one attack, it has a 100% chance, so guaranteed, to evade the next attack. And evade means that you cannot deal damage or place any debuffs or have any effect on that you would normally have on that attack. So that can be very annoying because you could have a secondary DPS come in after the first one and they won't deal any damage, or your debuffer comes in after you deal a decent amount of damage and you can't land your debuffs that might have kept your team alive, etc. So you want to keep this active passive in mind very much. So when this activates, it will place the perfect veil on him. So that's what I was alluding to earlier. So that will enable him to do a little bit more based on the rest of his kit. And then he can also place True Fear on the enemies, which can be quite annoying. So you don't want necessarily to miss your turns because he activated this. So you'll want to create a team that can get around this aspect of the kit, and we'll show a couple of ways of doing that. And when it comes to the other standard boss passives, pretty standard stuff. He's immune to all CC and all this type of stuff. He has the enemy max HP cap at 5%. That's kind of the new normal for bosses, just so you can't go in there with a Newt and a Marius and kind of blow it up instantly. He's immune to decreased speed and turn meter reduction effects, of course. HP burn is reduced from the normal 3% down to 1%, so it still works, but it won't do as much damage compared to other boss encounters. And then, of course, you have the Awakened Weakness stuff where you'll take less damage if you have Awakening levels, and you'll deal more damage to him and the minions if you have Awakening levels on your champions. So in terms of the general approach, you want to deal enough damage, but not too much damage, unless that's like the last hit that's going to be the kill shot, because he has a bunch of, the Perfect Veil coming in. You probably want some form of block buffs on him, just that way, even if you do happen to hit him too hard, he won't get the Perfect Veil. You probably want block debuffs or some sort of cleanser on your team, or some way to get around True Fears, so that is something you may want to consider as well. And then everything else is kind of ignorable. As we spoke about, it's not the end of the world if he places Leech or hits you with an A1. So in terms of the stages that you'll want to farm, stage 20 is definitely what I recommend for the vast majority of people. It is the most efficient stage in terms of points per energy spent, and so you'll get the most bang for your buck in terms of tournaments. So the Shredder's Wrath tournaments that are specific to the event dungeon, and or just in general if you're running this for dungeon divers. But if you want to challenge yourself a little bit more, you can push up to stage 25. You'll just get a little bit better gear, and it'll cost you a little bit more energy. And if you're a superior person than myself, then you can venture all the way down to stage 30. That way you can get mythical gear and the best gear quality possible if you manage to make a team that can deal with stage 30. But again, I recommend most people, endgame free to play, would probably stick somewhere between 20 and 25, and I'll showcase a team for 20 and 25. So starting with the stage 20 team, we have a pretty interesting composition here. We have the lovely Whisper coming into the mix. We have a Gizmak, we have a Marius, we have a Thoran, and we have a Lydia. So the structure of this team is essentially, I just wanted a bunch of champions who are guaranteed to not do damage below the 20% cap in order to proc his passive, and then they just set the table, get him weak enough, and kill all the minions, of course, and then that sets the table for the Whisper to come in with the big smack that should finish him off, and that will be beyond 20%, but it will also kill him, so I don't have to worry about that passive. So essentially Lydia is our debuffer, of course, and then we just have three DPSs. You can do this DPS in any form. It doesn't have to be a Marius, it doesn't have to be enemy max HP at all, it doesn't have to be HP burn Gizmak, but this was the most optimal combination of champions that I could come up with that did low enough damage to not proc the passive, but high enough damage to successfully kill the minions. There's kind of a delicate balance there. So the standard, Wukong explosion teams and poison stuff may or may not work depending on the composition, because you're going to get that guaranteed evasion. So let's go ahead and see this team in action. It's pretty straightforward, and it is also pretty darn quick. So Lydia is the fastest on the team. We get the debuffs out there, decrease defense and weaken. Gizmak, we're taking advantage of the fact that there are some minions, so we get some burn damage, even though it's somewhat reduced. Marius does some damage, Thoran does some damage, and Whisper comes in with the final blow. 550,000 damage on that hit. But she's on the edge, so every once in a while she doesn't actually finish him off, depending on the variability of damage numbers. But nonetheless, she's kind of basically hitting exactly where she needs to, based on the rest of the damage from everyone else, to single-handedly finish the boss off in a quick 12-second run. So again, the DPS can vary. You can use arena nukers, you can use ninja, you can use Wukong, etc. But what I just happened to find for this stage, at least stage 20, the stats are so low on the minions that it is very, very easy to exceed that 20%, which is something I didn't want to do. So I opted more so towards enemy max HP, or essentially things that are capped, hard capped, as we went through in the boss's passives and whatnot, so that I'm guaranteed to not exceed the limit, but I'm also doing enough damage to get low enough that Whisper can finish him off. For stage 25, I had to up the ante a little bit. One thing you will notice from my stage 20 team is that we didn't worry at all about putting up block debuffs to kind of protect the team from the True Fears, as I mentioned, but that will be the case for the stage 25 variation. So fairly similar composition, but instead of the Gizmak, we're running the Siphi, and so we're foregoing a little bit of damage in order to protect the team. Lydia is still going to be our debuffer. Of course, that could be whoever you happen to have, but Lydia is more endgame friendly, of course. Marius is in the mix. Atharon's still in the mix. So we do have 5 enemy max HP hits, and then Harima is going to be there as our primary DPS. Now, because of the Mighty Uko here in the minions, the turn order of the champions will vary highly depending upon just the RNG of the particular run. And this team takes a little bit over a minute, give or take. Again, it depends on the RNG. I do have a lot of protection sets here that can kind of protect us. This is a good RNG run, looks like. So Harima comes in, she kills Norog, typically AoE, then kills everyone else, and that's still not enough damage to proc the passive. Marius went first to kind of soften them up. Athorion does a little bit of damage as well. We make sure to get block buffs from him. That's partially another reason why he's in the team. And then Lydia is kind of our backup block buff. So now at this point, we just do some damage. He typically will kill one or both of Atharion and Marius at that point. Not that big of a deal. We pick them up. That's why we do have a reviver in this particular squad. And then we kind of just cycle through our abilities. Eventually we come back to Lydia. We come back to Marius. She does the triple hitter. And then I think Harima is probably going to get the killing. Oh, no. Atharion's going to get the killing blow here. But yeah, one of the 3 DPS will finish him off. But this was definitely a quicker run with the 48 seconds. The fastest being 36. But it can definitely take upwards of 90 seconds if Mighty Uko starts stealing block debuffs and increase defense and strength and all that mess. And so that's kind of where it's this team has fallen, but it has yet to fail. So for me, it's been fairly reliable, but that's kind of the crux, or that's kind of the basis of the team here for stage 25. So really quickly, let's run through the builds on these champions just for the sake of transparency. And note, of course, I am in the end game, so you are going to see, epics are going to be in power. There's going to be a lot of decent gear, not all fully ascended necessarily, but they're going to be these are my primary champions, so they're going to be pretty well geared. So just keep that in mind. You don't necessarily need to have these stats to have similar results. However, of course, if you want the one-shot Whisper type composition, you will need a fairly strong Whisper build. So speaking of Whisper, we'll dive into her build first. You can see here, she is, of course, 6-star ascended, crushing rend. Granted, it doesn't matter because we're using her A2, which already ignores the boss's defense as long as they're under a weaken. So Lydia is providing that, of course. But she's in a relentless set with Cruel as well as 1 piece of Merciless for the extra attack. Ideally, she'd be in 9-piece Merciless, but as you might be able to guess, I cannot pull that off. So Relentless is the next best thing. Relentless and Cruel is the next best thing. So total stats on her, 43,000 on the HP, 7.4k almost on the attack. Don't care about her defense, 253 on the speed. So on the quicker side, but that's mostly for the Phantom Shogun's Grove. 70% crit rate is all you need because she provides increased crit rate to herself, and the uptime on that is basically 100% of the time once you get her going. Nearly 300% on the crit damage, so again, she does have pretty darn good gear on, and then a little bit less caring about her accuracy or resistance. For the relic, I do have just a rare one, the Malefic Talon, so she has a chance to deal even more damage when she attacks, which is good. Again, she has the 1 main attack in that particular fight. In terms of the blessing, 6-star crushing rend, of course, if you happen to have a Whisper and you happen to have her at 6 stars, you definitely want to go crushing rend. If she's 5-star and below, I do recommend Phantom Touch instead. And then when it comes to the masteries, this is pretty standard for Whispers, but you want to go with the offense and defense tree. We're hugging basically the entirety of the left-hand side of the offense tree, as much damage boosting stuff as possible. You want to end on War Master because she has a chance to just deal bonus damage. You don't really care, or you don't really need to go with Helm Smasher because she ignores a lot of defense innately, especially on the her A2. So it's just kind of a bit overkill relative to the ability that does the most damage. Defense tree, main thing, you want Retribution because if she happens to survive a hit, she can counterattack, which may or may not place a weaken depending on whether or not she has accuracy in the build. Next up, we have my Gizmak the Terrible. He is built for arena somewhat, so he has 2 pieces of Stone Skin for extra resistance, and then he's in a lethal set. And so I have him in a fairly unique build. This is kind of what I call the anti-polymorph build. It's not as useful nowadays because polymorph is less common, but nonetheless, it does save him a couple of times because I just don't have pinpoint gear, good enough pinpoint gear to put on him instead. But in terms of his total stats here, 78,000 on the HP. This is the base form, 3,600 on the defense, 279 on the speed, full crit rate, 224 on the crit damage, so nothing crazy there, but he does have 500 on the resistance. And then just to compare to Form 2, where he's a little bit tankier, almost 4,000 on the defense, and then 83,000 on the HP. So in terms of the relic, I did manage to secure a Skull of Treason for him. So his HP burn placed by the wearer deal more 10% more damage, I guess scaling to 20% at level 12 or not level 9. But he does more damage to enemies with higher max HP. So all the tanky champions in Stone Skin, he's more likely to break through it with the burn. So that is the relic if you happen to have it. And you happen to have a Gizmac, of course, you definitely want to run that. In terms of the blessing, of course, Incinerate is the best thing for PvP. If you happen to, I have mine booked in Form 1, I have mine booked in Form 2 as well, just because I happen to get enough books to do that. And then when it comes to the masteries, like I mentioned, he is built for Arena, so we do have him kind of in the hit first damage form here. So lots of stuff, Heart of Glory when he attacks, Ruthless Ambush, that's standard nuker stuff. Cycle of Violence is fun, and Helm Smasher, of course, to ignore as much defense as possible. And then the defense tree, Retribution kind of being the main ticket. And I went for Solidarity. Again, my build is relatively high resistance for a nuker of sorts, and so him placing the bunch of buffs in the base form, he can get some extra resistance, so he might be able to resist even more things, but that's relatively unique to my particular build. After that, we have my Chimera built Lydia, who's in a 6-piece protection set and 2 pieces of perception. I think ideally I would want her in a completely different setup, a 9-piece feral build for Chimera, but I just don't have the gear, once again, to pull that off, unfortunately, and maintain the stats I would like to maintain on her. So total stats here, 67,000 on the HP, 4K on the defense, 283 on the speed, so pretty darn quick, 460 on the resistance, and 481 on the accuracy. So accuracy is high enough for a Chimera. Resistance is high enough because I do also like to use her in Doom Tower, well, a lot of areas, but namely Doom Tower bosses. I want her to have enough resistance so she doesn't get frozen by the Frostbiter or locked out by the Eternal Dragon, stuff like that. I want her to be able to land her or use her abilities 100% of the time in those fights to make them as quick to farm as possible. So if I can pull off these stats in a 9-piece feral set sometime in the future, that would be great. Don't have a relic on her. She is booked, of course. Brimstone, just 1 star, that is for Chimera in terms of that. And then for the masteries, in order to secure those stats, I had to forego going for War Master, even though, you know, like I said, she is mostly PvE at this point. I went for Eagle Eye just because I needed the accuracy to actually land debuffs up and through Ultra Nightmare Chimera. So we're picking up a lot of the accuracy boosting stuff on the support tree, lower steel for the extra stats, which synergizes well with the protection set. In this case, Master Hexer, of course, and then the defense tree. You know, more resistance here, Shadow Heal for extra healing in case things heal, Resurgent, standard stuff, Retribution, and of course Deterrence, which is helpful to counterattack, particularly in the Ram form. But I think her passive does it as well automatically, so maybe it's a little bit redundant, but I digress. Next up, we have my Marius built in a pretend this is 4-piece feral and a lethal set. So long term, I'd like to have him 4-piece feral, but for now, he's in double reaction, so pending some extra feral gil. So hopefully, fingers crossed for next siege, we'll see. But total stats here, almost 50,000 on the HP, 5.2k on the defense, 273 on the speed, full crit rate, 260 on the crit damage, and then 358 on the accuracy. I do have a relic on him. He is used in both PvP and PvE alike, and I do have one of my 2 cast gazes on him with the ignore defense gemstones as well as extra defense when he's crit, so he just gets a little bit more damage. But yeah, he does have one of my cat's gazes, and then he's fully booked, of course. And then I opted for Soul Reap. Soul Reap does, you know, some damage. It can finish off some bosses, but also can finish off people in the arena. So I like the dual purpose blessing there with the Soul Reap. So he's not fully optimized for PvE or PvP. You'll see a lot of Mariuses with like Crushing Rend for PvE, and then potentially some other blessings specifically for PvP. In terms of the masteries, optimized once again for damage like a nuker. This is more of an arena style masteries for the offense tree. All the damage boosting stuff, Cycle of Violence, which does work or can work against bosses whose enemy max HP cap is only 10%, because the 3 hits do equal 30%, meaning you can reduce the cooldown of that. And then we're coming down to Helm Smasher, of course, to ignore as much defense as possible. Support tree, similar to Lydia, we're getting as much of the accuracy boosting stuff, lower steel as well for the extra stats. Sniper to increase the chance of landing Enfeeble on his A1, and then Master Hexer to potentially extend the duration of the Enfeeble from the A1, which can come in very, very clutch to get a 2-turn Enfeeble on your enemies in the arena. Next up, we have my Wallmaster Athorion, who's in a extremely difficult build, but he's in high resistance, high accuracy, but also a decent amount of damage and full crit rate. So Perception, 2 pieces of Stone Skin, which is effectively a resistance set, another resistance set, 1 piece of protection. So as much stats as I can fit into his build, as you'll see here. But 53,000 on the HP, 4.5k on the attack, 3k-ish on the defense, 258 on the speed, so fairly quick. Full crit rate, 279 on the crit damage, 486 on the resistance, and then 400 on the accuracy. So this is primarily built for Nightmare Hydra, so I do want him to be, he is rather, one of the Mischief tanks, so he can attract, with the extra buffs he puts on himself, he can attract the Head of Mischief and then just resist the buffs being stolen. But also, for the same reason, in up and through Ultra Nightmare Chimera, I want him to be able to resist the Viper form when he tries to steal your buffs, but also still be able to land his debuffs when he has increased accuracy placed on himself. In terms of the relic on him, I do have one of my Erethi Coronets, so he gets more damage for each debuff, effectively the Nature's Wrath Blessing in relic form. And in terms of the blessing, I do not have Nature's Wrath, although that's probably best in slot, but because I'm using him, like I said, as a Mischief tank, I do have the Lightning Cage Blessing on him, so that's 1 extra buff that can hopefully attract the attention of the Head of Mischief. And then when it comes to the masteries here, pretty standard stuff, left hand, or hugging the entirety of the left hand side of the offense tree, coming down to War Master, and a max HP hitter, we just wanted to deal a little bit more damage. And then for the support tree, we're starting with more of the accuracy boosting stuff, turn meter stuff on the right hand side, but I went for the Y split of Lasting Gifts to extend the duration of his buffs, again indexing more into Mischief tanking capabilities, and then Master Hexer to extend the duration of the debuffs that he puts out there, and making sure to get through Lore Steel for the extra stats as well. And then switching back to more arena focuses, we have my Siphi the Lost Bride, who's in 8 pieces of protection, so not quite 9 pieces just yet. In terms of first total stats, 101,000 on the HP, one of the highest on my account, nearly 4,000 on the defense, 373 on the speed, so pretty darn fast, but you'd expect that on a speed Siphi in protection. And I still opted to go as high resistance as possible, so 662 on the resistance. In terms of the relic, she has one of my best Journal of Necretos, level 15 here, so you're getting a lot of extra healing and a little bit of turn meter boost as well. Her passive does a lot of healing, so this kind of synergizes well with her. And then I have the gemstone to extra resistance when enemies try to do some CC to you, including sheep. And then for the blessing, of course, I went with Intimidating Presence. She is one of my speed arena champions, so we do want to improve the speed aura. Typically, if I'm running a speed aura, I should say, on the team, I want to improve the speed aura for the team. And then for the mastery, it's kind of indexing more into the support, keeping her alive type stuff. We have the defense tree where you take less damage from crits. We have a bunch of the extra resistance. She does place a lot of buffs, healing herself, potentially if the enemies heal, Resurgent, removing debuffs, Retribution, counterattacking, which can provide healing, especially if the person attacking you just finished their turn. They're going to be low turn meter, so you're going to get the heal. Unshakable for extra resistance, and then a lot of the healing stuff in the support tree, but I wanted to make sure I come back or banked over to get Lore Steel for the extra stats, the extra speed, HP, resistance, etc. from the protection set. And of course, you do want Lasting Gifts to extend the duration of her protected buffs. Then last but not least, we have my arena built Harima here. So she is in a lethal set and 2 pieces of Kill Stroke for the extra crit damage and I guess the extra speed as well. Total stats on her, 48,000 on the HP, 7,000 on the defense, 264 on the speed, full crit rate, 352 on the crit damage. So again, consolidating all of my best gear in terms of a defense-based nuker is on her. And then I didn't really care about the accuracy or the resistance, but 253 is enough probably to land her provoke on like some squishy nukers and whatnot. For the relic, I opted for the Gilded Dragonstone, an epic one, and she just gets more defense whenever she receives damage. So more damage she takes, more defense she has, more damage she can deal. It also gives her defense as one of the main stats. For the blessing, I opted for Ward of the Fallen. That just gives her a chance to be even more tanky because she has the 3 stacks at the stacks of bone armor at the start, and on top of her passive reducing ignore defense, you can try and the goal is to try and keep her alive. Doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. And then for the masteries here, once again, a different approach, but the similar style of trying to get as much of the damage dealing stuff as possible. We kind of going on the left hand side and the right hand side. Cycle of Violence, notable Shield Breaker on her because typically I'm running her as a go second champion, so they're gonna have all their buffs out, and you don't get the benefit of the other stuff. We may or may not be full HP, for example. But ultimately, of course, we end on Helm Smasher to ignore as much defense as possible. And then the defense tree, notable thing here is Retribution. Of course, if she counterattacks, that can easily kill someone in the right situation. And of course, you want the extra defense for the damage. So there you have it. Those are the two teams that I came up with for the event dungeon. Better late than never as far as talking about the event dungeon, but hopefully you found this helpful in terms of creating your own team or potentially improving your team or making your team faster. Be sure to let me know in the comment section down below what team you're running and what stage you're running it on, and what's your time. Is it under a minute? Is it a few seconds? Are you kind of doing some sort of one-shot composition? I'd be keen to know what your strategy has been for the event dungeon, in this case the Shredder being the boss. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel, and feel free to hit the subscribe button down below as well, if and only if you're enjoying the content overall on the channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.